Well, hey everybody, Wes McDonald here, and as always, every Wednesday, same time, same place. I'm here with my good buddy Kenneth Edmonds. How are you, Ken?
I am fine. How are things with you today?
Oh, no complaints whatsoever. And pre-show, we were actually chatting that this time tomorrow, you and I will be in the same place.
We will. We will. You'll be a speaker, and I'm going to be a correspondent covering that event.
Yeah, and it's funny, it doesn't happen very often that you and I are actually physically together. So it'll be fun. Maybe we'll do an impromptu live little session there. And welcome.
Oh,
Yeah, we got Greg
I was
Walter
just,
joining us. And for anyone else, make sure that you do leave your questions and comments. We'd love to hear from you. And certainly, we've got an incredible guest today. We're going to be actually talking about sentient strategy. So, a really good one. If you are not watching live, if you're watching either on the recording on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, continue to ask those questions. We will get to those questions as if they were live, and we do it all the time. So, don't forget, leave your questions and comments. And more importantly, where are you watching from? And I did see Greg Walters say hello there. I didn't see where he was watching from. Where?
and I'm in Denver.
Yeah, and I'm in Canada right now. And we'll bring in our guest. And just one second while I bring up the page. And Alan Weiss, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Oh, no complaints. And maybe you can start us off with where you are joining us from.
This is East Greenwich, Rhode Island.
Love it. Yeah. My wife and I was actually there for a conference in New York, and that whole area is one of my favorite areas. So
This is Rhode Island, not New York.
Yeah, well, that area. Yeah.
Okay, the Northeast, right.
The Northeast. Yeah, absolutely.
We just got back from New York. We spent a long weekend down there, saw a few plays and had some good meals, and we hop on the train, go back and forth.
Yeah, that's the beauty of that area. And I also love the drive through. So going from Buffalo through is some of the most beautiful countryside that there is, in the state, right? It's absolutely fantastic. And I'm just going to bring up a page for you here for a second, Alan, so you'll be able to show everybody where your webpage is. And if you do want to reach out to Alan directly, which I'm sure after today you will want to do that for sure, that you can actually reach his page, alanweiss.com. And I do have the Sentient Strategy book link there as well, but alanweiss.com to be able to reach out to him directly there when you want to. And of course, as we're pretty active on LinkedIn, you can find Alan on LinkedIn. Clearly, you're doing a lot there as well. You've got over 11,000 followers, which are following me on there. And I know that I've gone through and looked at some of your different posts, some of the stuff on your book, etc. So for all of our LinkedIn followers and viewers, make sure that you find Alan there. And hey, let's jump right into this if you're good with that, Alan.
Sure.
Maybe just for those of our viewers that do not know you so well, just a brief introduction on yourself.
I started my career consulting in Princeton, New Jersey. I came up to Rhode Island to be president of a consulting firm here. I was fired after 15 months because the owner and I hated each other. And I told my wife, no moron's ever going to fire me again. I went out on my own in 85. I've written 60 plus books. They're in 15 languages. And my fourth book was $1 Million Consulting, which changed my world. And so that's been on the shelves for 30 years. It's now in its sixth edition. It's also Audible. And I had been, through the 90s up until the early 2000s, I had been consulting with Fortune 1000 companies and the creme de la creme. But then all of a sudden, individual consultants, coaches, entrepreneurs came to me and said, how can we learn to do what you're doing? And I began to shift toward that, what I call the retail market. So today, 99% of my business is retail. I coach people globally. Thank God for remote abilities here and Zoom and so forth. And that's what I do today. So in a nutshell, there I am.
Well, that's amazing. And I'm scrolling through your website so people can see some of that stuff in 60 books. That is definitely a record. I think we've had a couple of folks, can't correct me if I'm wrong, maybe that have had 12 books or 14 books, but never 60.
Well,
I don't know if that's 60.
I go for volume, not accuracy.
Oh, that's great. And just for everyone, again, if you do want to check out his page, that you can find it here. Very simple. Just alanweiss.com, and you'll learn lots there. And speaking of learning, maybe we can talk a little bit about what's going on, right? And in your talks, you're known for bringing up some concepts that maybe push the boundaries a little bit. And one of them is this idea of the new reality, right? That kind of the pre-pandemic strategies and things that we did before the pandemic simply don't apply anymore. So maybe speak to this new reality a bit.
I've actually trademarked the firm No Normal. People talk about a return to normal or a new normal, and that's ridiculous. First of all, normal means typical, and who wants to be typical?
Huh.
And what we're facing today are new realities. In other words, this kind of remote work, people working at home, organizations changing the way they deal with customers and clients and so forth. This will continue. This kind of volatility will continue. Innovation will continue. So consequently, some search to return to the old or to create some new normal is ridiculous. But it is good to talk about, and it's accurate to talk about new realities. And new realities include things like social consciousness. New realities include things such as understanding that you should embrace the customer or the client as you design new products and services. And so it's things like that that make the difference.
And when you talk about the social consciousness, maybe you can speak to that a little further.
Well, when I designed Sentient strategy, to which you referred earlier, it was just pre-pandemic. And my feeling was, Peter Drucker's been one of my heroes, but Peter Drucker invented modern strategy in the 50s at GM with Sloan. And I'm saying to myself, 70 years is a long time. And I've had it with these clients who take months to create a strategy that looks at 10 years. You might as well look at a horoscope. It's absolutely pointless work. And so I said, I'm going to create a strategy that talks about self-awareness, sentience, which can be created in a day or two and look out 1 year. That's what's reasonable. Then the pandemic hits. And so I made sure also that it could be done completely remotely. And what I found was there were two key axes, if you will. One was awareness of the environment in which you operate, but the other was consciousness of one's actions. And that's where the social consciousness comes in. And just as the social consciousness and the consciousness of justice came to the fore coincidentally, I was addressing that in this model.
I love it. And you also touched on sort of the reality now, this new reality of remote work. Obviously, all of us are joining in from different places. And Ken and I are both remote workers. I have been for 20 some odd years. And obviously, organizations are really struggling with that now. So do you think, how do you feel? And this one isn't in the questions I prepared, but how do you feel about remote work? Is that here to stay? Is that part of the new reality?
There's no question it's here to stay. I mean, it's not even arguable. The question, though, is this. To what extent can leaders lead people who sometimes are present and sometimes are not present and are sometimes hybrid and a combination of both? This is key. And I want to tell you, the trouble is based on a myth. And the myth is the 40-hour work week. And so from my quite extensive experience working with large organizations, people who are constantly on the job, constantly physically present for 40 hours a week are not 40 hours a week productive. They socialize, they take breaks, they do other things, and I don't blame them. That's how you recharge your batteries. So thinking that people at home working remotely must be productive 40 hours a week is ridiculous. So my metric is people who are working at home will be distracted by things other than what they're distracted at work, but a distraction is a distraction. And so whether it's another employee playing Angry Birds or you're home looking to play a diminishing fifth chord on your guitar, if you get 20 hours of productive work from people at home, you're in the ballpark. And that's the metric you should use, and that's the expectation you should create.
Yeah. The other thing I find, and I'm not sure if your experience is the same, but the one thing I love about working remotely, because I'm a creative and I do a lot of writing and video editing and interviews, is that I have this creative flexibility from, say, 5:30 in the morning until about noon, when I am just fired up, and all of those creative things I can do then, right? Outside of that structure, like you said, of the 40-hour work week. And I like how you talk about this 20 hours of productivity, right? Because there are times during the day when I'm simply not that productive, and I'll go to more menial, sort of tasks that I can do almost on autopilot, right?
Right. So one of the new realities that you referred to before is the fact that you have to tap into people's ability at their highest potential for being productive and at the highest level of their talents at the moment. And so when people are working at home, they can pretty much arrange that on their own. Some people work good at 6 a.m. If
right.
you can arrange for them to have work at 6 a.m, great, right? That's what they do on reservations lines. There's 24 hours for reservations line. Somebody's working at that hour. So we're going to see more and more of that. And besides the things that we've seen, for example, high-end restaurants that provided takeout food during the pandemic, are still doing it because it's profitable as hell. You don't have silverware, you don't have linen, you don't have staff. You just send it out the door. Now, get it to a different location so your diners who are coming in suits and ties aren't with the people in sweatshirts and hoodies getting the takeout. But you can arrange these things.
Yeah. And I find it interesting that most of your business has also shifted to retail. My wife's a retailer. We actually have a small boutique shop, which is really a lifestyle business, but she loves it. And, this idea, what really shifted you towards working mostly in the retail space?
It was the ability to see very fast results. It was the ability to stop traveling so much. And it was the ability to be able to work globally with people with just slight adjustments to my schedule. Now, I've been to 60 some odd countries. And my wife and I have recently been to Australia and London and Paris. So we like to travel. However, there are places I've traveled to, I won't name them, which I don't need to go back to. My wife will go to Italy at the drop of a hat. She's Italian on both sides back to the Medicis. But I've worked in the rainforests of Mindanao, and I don't need to go back there, right? But remotely, you don't get wet. So this has been a boom to professional services providers. But I think it takes some adjustment. You guys have got a beautiful adjustment here. You're live on different platforms. And I mean, that's rather marvelous. Before you needed studios to do this kind of thing.
Right.
And so, like you said, here are three of us sitting in a different place. So I think we're seeing that these new realities are going to continue. And they're going to be exploited. I mean that in a positive sense.
Sure.
By people who are most agile and nimble and ready to do it. And that's where Sentient strategy comes in. That's why you can't look out 5 years or 3 years anymore. And if you just think about a year from now and who you want to be, that's realistic.
And it looks like Greg did come in with a comment here. Good stuff. 40-hour myth is good. Been seeing this since the 80s.
Yeah.
Interesting. And let's move on to another point here, just to make sure, in respect for time and to move through some of your expertise, right? This idea of two-dimensional focus. Maybe talk through that and how that affects Sentient strategy.
Well, I think that we tend to focus on too many aspects of strategy in the future. The more choices people have, the more they get confused. There was a study done that showed that the more choices you give people, the more they paralyze. They don't make any decision. And so a lot of people, for example, faced with all different investment alternatives, keep their money under the mattress or in low interest, bank accounts. So you have to give people very few options. So the two major things I looked at was, as I said, awareness of the environment and consciousness of the results of your actions. And if you think of these things, and then you think of the strategic factors that can most move you toward your goal in a year, you can start to make intelligent decisions. And you can see by comparing certain companies in the same business, who tends to do this well innately and who doesn't. Now this is just my observation and my experience, but I find that JetBlue does a far better job understanding its environment and the consciousness of its actions than does United. And when you tell me, well, we're late and your luggage got lost because there was weather. Well, the other airlines had the same weather, unless they found some time warp to get through it. So JetBlue doesn't have an air club like American or United or Delta. However, the gates are magnificently clean. They'll provide you with newspapers and coffee, and they let you know immediately if a flight is late and why and what the delay will be. And I've never, ever been on a JetBlue flight with an unhappy flight crew. Never. Not once.
Wow.
They are always positive. And American, hit or miss. Depends on the day. So
I'm flying American tomorrow, so I hope it's a good day.
I hope it's a good day for them. Yeah, I hope they're not upset with management. But you can see from organizations in the same business the difference. I'll tell you something else. When we were in London, we were in Paris, and we were in New York recently. We take Uber all over, and the ability to schedule Uber ahead of time, I think is sort of equivalent to fluoride in terms of discoveries. I mean, this is a great thing. In a thunderstorm in New York, the Uber driver is there waiting for us in a thunderstorm on time. Now, I have taken Uber maybe 300 times, maybe more. I've never met an Uber driver who complained or was unhappy, not once. And the company has had some problems. The company's made some mistakes. They're not perfect.
As all companies do, sure.
There's something working there. because they're professional. They get you where you want to go, and they know how to get there. So we're starting to see these things. Something's a luxury till you use it once, and after that, it's a necessity. I've never found anybody who said, I've thrown away my automatic garage door opener. I prefer to pull the thing up myself.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can't reach the television remote control because I'm comfortable, on the couch, I call my kids who are downstairs. I ask them to come up and get me the control. So we become accustomed, we become inured to these improvements. And that's why I call them new realities. They're going to stay and evolve.
I love it. And, this idea, when I hear you talking about the airlines, right, is that and correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be, but it sounds like when you talk about sort of this two-dimensional focus, that it simplifies what we decide that we're going to be good at. Is that fair? That we try and make sure that our value statement, our mission is simpler?
Yeah, I think that's a key word you just used. Mission is raison d'etre, right? It's why we're here. And in strategy, people look at it wrong. It's the mantra is, vision, mission, values. The mission is why we exist. And the vision is a picture of the future. In my case, I'm saying a year out, which is a metric which shows we're fulfilling our mission. It's why we're here. And if you look at the literature for the last 20 years, motivation is intrinsic. I can't motivate you. I motivate myself, and same for you. What motivates people at work is the ability to use the full range of their talents on the job and be recognized for it. That's unequivocal. It's not money. If you give more money to an unhappy employee, you have a wealthy or unhappy employee. Right?
Yeah.
So it's all about my using talents and recognizing for it. And that's what happens in the best organizations. And that's what you see, I think, in JetBlue. And that's what you see elsewhere. And so they say, if you look at Dyson's one of my favorite companies. People think they're in the vacuum cleaner business. They're not. Dyson has hand dryers, and they have hair dryers and vacuums, which are magnificent. Dyson's in the airflow business. They know what their mission is, right? IBM stands for International Business Machine. If they thought they were in the business machine business, they'd be out of business. They're in the information exchange business, and most of IBM's profit today comes from, guess what? Consulting.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And I remember that shift, back in the day when people thought of them as Big Blue, right? And that IBM now, if you probably ask somebody that would say, under 30, what it stands for, maybe a lot of them wouldn't even know anymore, right? That the acronym has become letters. My wife's store is the same way. She goes by CQ, which used to be for cruise quarters. It was a much more nautically themed store. It's not anymore. So like that, it's the mission has changed, right?
Well, Kodak, I used to think when I was a kid that there was a government regulation that film had to be in yellow boxes because Kodak, they ruled, right? There were a few red boxes. I knew what they were. They were Fuji. And so Kodak rules the roost. Well, guess who had the first electronic components for camera work? Kodak, not the Japanese, Kodak.
Wow.
But Kodak wouldn't pursue it because they saw their mission as protecting the emulsion business and the chemical business and the chemists. And Kodak's out of the film business now.
Yeah. One of my last visits to Kodak actually was in Rochester. And it was at that time when they were just starting to go through that shift. And I had a very uncomfortable conversation with them because I had a Canon digital device. I think it was like, I don't even know what it was. Like the frame was 600 by 480. And pictures were terrible, right? And it was almost like they were making fun of it at that time. So when you say that, you're having a Kodak moment today, it's probably different than it was in their heyday.
When the Japanese started to rule the roost in electronic photography, Kodak was still hiring chemists.
Isn't that something? Wow. And Greg,
I was going to say, I like Greg's comment there that IBM equals typewriters. And for most people, that's probably what they remember IBM for, because you had this electric back in the day when typewriters were a business, which is no longer the case either.
Yeah, well, remember punch cards? The IBM punch cards, they put them into the computer would eat them up and something else would come out, right?
Hey, and Greg did have a question earlier, and I want to make sure that we get to it. How do you see the corporate structure or hierarchy shifting or falling? Roll in artificial intelligence. Is it fair to view today's reality through the same lens as we did in the 50s?
Well, it's not fair to review today's realities through any other lens but today's lens, and if you can, a slightly future lens. I mean, look, we look at the past through memory, which isn't always precise. We look at the present through perception, and perceptions differ. And we look at the future through imagination. And that's what we're weakest at, imagination, absolutely weakest. So I see corporate structures and hierarchies, to answer Greg's question here, radically shifting. The old, I love the term hierarchies he used. You'd have, like, say, a law firm or an accounting firm, and you got on the partner track. And if you got off the partner track, you were gone, right? And then you worked, you became a partner, and you got your name somewhere on the door. Were you going to make it any easier for other people to become partners? No. You want them to go through the same boot camp. I got news for you. That's all going to change, because people are going to look for talent. They're not going to look for credential. They're not going to look for hierarchies. I mean, one of my brands is the contrarian. And I don't believe that, a certificate from a coaching university makes you a better coach. I believe that your experience and what you've done for people show how good a coach you are. And when people trail 13 initials after their names, I start to get suspicious. So I think that the change we're going to see is flatter organizations. We're going to see executives at the top setting strategy. We're going to see some middle management who are really talent wranglers. And then we'll see some talent which is resident and permanent, but we'll see a lot of transient talent. They come and go by the project. And we're not going to see universities, for example, which house and clothe and feed and all this stuff, thousands of students. The problem, though, is this new reality and this remote, work, virtual work, has failed dismally in the public schools. And as much as it's worked in business, it has robbed a generation of learning.
Yeah.
And so that has to be the highest priority, so that kids can advance not on a warehouse basis by age and by grade, but can advance based on their talent and their ability to learn, but on a remote basis.
Yes, and it is such a tricky one. I have 2 kids that went through that. My son missed his graduation, actually, his high school graduation, right? That final, year. And it was tricky because, I mean, like you said, I've been doing it for 20 years, working remotely, get in a plane once in a while when I have to go somewhere. But for the most part, it's here in my chair. And just watching how hard it was for them, right, as students, because there's so many elements of that for them as young people, which aren't necessarily satisfied, through a video monitor, right? Yeah. So appreciate you bringing that up. And in respect for your time, we are getting pretty close to the end of our time together today. And one of the things that you talk about is the success trap. You did mention earlier that money is not enough to necessarily motivate people, right? That motivation comes from within and allowing you to sort of express your talents. What is the success trap? What do you mean by that?
Well, I want you to picture, it's called the S curve. I want you to picture an S. For me, this is screen sharing, by the way. I want you to picture an S, and your practice, your company, your products, your services, whatever, they grow up that S curve. But eventually it flattens out into a plateau. And because of the laws of entropy, all plateaus erode and you start to go down. Now, in my experience, the only people who can coast are people going downhill. You can't coast uphill, right?
That's interesting. Yeah.
You can't even coast on a plateau. You can only, so if you're coasting, say, hey, I'm coasting, you got problems. And so the way you deal with this is at the top of the S curve, you make a leap to the next S curve. Otherwise, you're on the success trap where you're on the plateau and you think you're doing fine, but you're actually going downhill. And the great organizations, the great entrepreneurs, they keep leaping to the next S curve. And that's the secret.
And I wonder, I'm just trying to think of organizations where I've seen that experience, right? And maybe one of them, when I look at Microsoft back in the day, that when they provided, basically, software which had to be installed on your computer, right? And so was a jump to the next S curve for them when they finally figured out how to, become the online giant to be able to compete with someone like Google? Is that an example?
It is an example. And, take my very favorite example. I bought Apple at 17.
Oh,
and so that's why I can sit here talking to you doing nothing. So,
wow.
But listen, Apple just came out a day or two ago with these new goggles that take virtual reality and reality and combine them. But what was Apple known for? They were known for computers. They were known for hardware.
Right.
And then it became software. And then it became apps because of the iPhone and so forth and so on. They're constantly jumping S curves. And so we see that amidst really outstanding companies. And that's the secret to innovation.
Yeah, Apple has really done a phenomenal job of that, right? And not just through Steve Jobs. I mean, he obviously did a really good job of ingraining that in the company's mission, right? Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
I did see some, some first look reviews on that headset, and he's essentially Apple is really looking at it as not virtual reality. They're not calling it that. They're really calling it, what do they call it? It's something computing, right? In other words, we're getting away from our desk and now bringing computing, here, right? It'll be interesting to see how that goes in the coming time.
Yeah, and it just is very quickly. A part of that growth relies on failure. If you ain't failing, you ain't trying. And so the Apple had Lisa.
Yeah,
It didn't work. Throw it out. But you have to fail in order to succeed. And too many people are afraid of failure. It's not about perfection. It's about success.
I love it.
Yeah, I want to inject there because I think one of the things that hurts a lot of companies is they reward success and penalize failure rather than recognizing that if they celebrate failure too and somebody tried something new and it didn't work, that's okay. What did we learn from it? What can we use from it to go forward? And so they create these environments where people are uncomfortable to go outside of the box. And then now it becomes that flat part of the S curve because nothing's changing. It's the status quo forever.
You're absolutely right. I had a big client in Pittsburgh, and we invented an award to give out the annual dinner, the best idea that didn't work. And because the idea is not to reward success, it's to reward the behaviors that lead to success. And so as long as you have the right behaviors, you'll be successful more than not. But if you, as you say, if you only reward a success and you whack a failure, people are going to be afraid.
Yeah, I look to the animal world, right? When you think one of my favorite animals, which is an eagle, its success in hunting, I think, is something ridiculous, like 1 out of every 40 attempts, right? So it's
throughout history, from the Tyrannosaurus to a cheetah today, throughout history, predators have a 10% success rate. So if you want lunch for your family, it's going to probably take you 10 tries to get it.
Yeah, I kind of like that analogy because as much as they fail, right, 90% of the time, that 10% of the time puts them at the top of the
right. To see that the animals we're talking about have no alternative. You got to eat. In the business world, people can go under their desk and say, well, I'll still get my pay.
That's true. I love it. And listen, we are at the end. I know that you have another commitment at the bottom of the half hour. So
thank you.
Cannot thank you enough for joining us today and sharing this. And just want to put the screen back up. Everybody, you can actually get onto alanweiss.com. There is a page there for his book that you can access there. Also, you can just visit alanweiss.com to learn about some other things. And I know you mentioned there were some free resources there, for people as
Absolutely.
well, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And for all of our listeners and viewers, as always, cannot thank you enough for joining us every Wednesday with these topics. And as I always like to say, Ken, until next time, keep learning.
And keep leveling up.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much.